Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. So today's video is about Camilla Tominey. You may have heard of her. So she is a royal correspondent, journalist and broadcaster. I've got my research down here. You may very well know her from the hashtag Camilla Tominey is a liar. So Camilla Tominey is accused of lying fairly frequently when it comes to her coverage of Meghan and Harry. I want to get into some of that. I'll probably make a load more videos about her more specific articles and the things she does. But for this video, and the sake of brevity, I've chosen 3 things which I thought are kind of the best examples, and one of them's really recent, as a kind of overview for anyone who doesn't want to kind of go through it bit by bit. Also have to say here, I'm not saying that Camilla Tominey is definitely 100% a liar. I'm saying that there's a lot of things that she reports on which are wrong, or somehow the message seems to be coming through slightly differently, doesn't it, in a lot of her stuff. So that's what I'm going to say, and you can make up your own minds about whether you think she's a liar or whatever. You know, we'll get through the different options. So as briefly as I can, Camilla Tominey, royal correspondent, journalist, broadcaster. You've probably seen her on the television. She does a lot of appearances on, I've seen her on This Morning, I've seen her on the news. She's on GB News. Yeah, that's right, she's there. GB News, the proud home of Camilla Tominey, Nigel Farage and Dan Whitten. But the interesting thing is that she shows up a lot talking about Harry and Meghan and giving her opinions, and I'm assuming she's getting a fee for these things. So I think it's even worse that what she's saying is potentially wrong, and I often think she takes the gig without anything new to offer. You know, she'll just kind of recycle the same kind of tabloid things, but she doesn't really have any extra information, and she's taking money from it, and she's also trying to make people hate on Meghan Markle. And you know, if you want to do a speaking appearance and make some money, like, that's fine, like, go for it. But the problem I have is when someone is presenting themselves as some sort of expert and they're constantly giving misinformation and they're kind of smearing, right? So they're adding to a hate campaign. They're not really giving information they have. They're just saying something hateful about somebody that it's popular to hate because it gets them a lot of money. And I do honestly think that makes it more dangerous and serious and worth looking at than if it was just a random person or celebrity saying it, because Camilla Tominey is a royal correspondent, journalist and broadcaster. So you'd expect a journalist and broadcaster, well, would you, if you know about British journalism, you'd expect them to, you know, check their facts, try and be slightly unbiased. That's not what's happening here. So before anyone comes at me with the free speech thing, that's fine. Anyone can have any opinion. I've had criticism recently of, devoted to Meghan Markle. I'm not devoted to Meghan Markle. I just see a big injustice happening, and I think we should stand up against injustice wherever we see it. I'm also big at holding our media to account, and I get really angry when I see people misusing their positions in the media. So recently Camilla Tominey was given her own show, her own segment on GB News. I've spoken about GB News before on this channel. It came into being because some people believed that things here weren't already right-wing and bigoted enough. And that they needed a specific channel on which they could hate on trans people, refugees, people that are striking. If you're ever channel surfing and you go past GB News, you can actually fill out like a bingo card of the things that they will be talking about. Give it 10 minutes and they'll be ripping into trans people and being heavily transphobic. And I'll probably make a video about GB News as a whole. But like I said, it's got Nigel Farage on it. Nigel Farage seems to be a friend of Camilla Tominey. There's a segment I've seen of them together, like drinking and chatting kind of thing. Dan Whitten's on there. It's not objective. It's a really horrible, hateful channel, basically. It basically runs on trying to create offence. I've heard it's not particularly doing very well. Apparently they tried to recruit Piers Morgan, but they couldn't pay him enough. Apparently in May 2022, a former GB News staff member told the New Statesman that at times they were so desperate for guests that they had resorted to booking their own parents. And they're also apparently being investigated for giving out COVID misinformation. Apparently. I could be wrong, that's what I've found. So how does Camilla Tominey tie into this? Well, she's actually the journalist who broke the news. She was actually nominated for Scoop of the Year by the British Press Awards for discovering the relationship between Harry and Meghan. So she's been pretty invested in that story from the start. I mean, even that. And it's hard to apply morality to a lot of tabloid journalists. But even that, your big scoop is discovering that 2 people are in a relationship. Really important news being broken there. But Camilla Tominey is the woman who wrote the article in which she said Meghan had made Kate cry. So I've read the full article, and she tries to say since that, oh, it was a really balanced article. It was not a balanced article. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was really trying to present Meghan as all those awful stereotypes, and it worked. Because all across the press, it was this kind of racial idea. I'm not saying Camilla Tominey used the racial idea, but I'm saying that what she did enabled those racial ideas of the aggressive black woman. How dare she, the audacity of her coming over here and making our poor, sweet, white English Rose cry. So that created a wave of hatred for Meghan here, and she couldn't correct the record because in the family they're told, you know, don't complain, don't explain. Although that in itself unearthed some really uncomfortable truths, which is that some of the royals are more protected than others. There's certain members of the family who are protected because although they say don't complain, don't explain, they are actually feeding their stories through royal experts, allegedly, you know, that's the argument. But people like Meghan aren't even allowed to put the record straight. So Meghan's problem was that, you know, she's being monstered in the press, the racism's really ramping up, the sexism's ramping up, it's getting really unlivable, and the palace don't put out any sort of correction. So we obviously know that when Meghan went on Oprah, she said it was the other way round, and that they all knew it was the other way round. So Kate had actually made Meghan cry. They were both like emotional, it was a stressful time. Meghan actually tried to kind of smooth things over in that interview and say it was fine. You know, Kate apologised, she gave her flowers, but she pointed out the fact that even though nobody had to incriminate Kate, the palace could have come forward and simply said that didn't happen. It didn't have to be, oh, Kate did it. It could have literally just been, that's not quite right, let's correct that. Now, Camilla Tominey will not name her sources. She says, you know, because that's good journalistic practice. She's really fulfilling all those ethical journalistic practices in all the other areas. But in that article, she'd cited a few sources, which she won't name, but she obviously has sources high up. Now, the thing with Camilla Tominey is when this was pointed out to her, she accidentally kind of helped them with their whistleblowing, which I think must have been incredibly painful for her because that's not what she's trying to do. But she actually became a very public example of what Harry and Meghan are trying to describe happens in royal reporting. Now, when Meghan's version of the story came out, and let's just acknowledge the fact that there was no further correction from the palace, so I think it's pretty obvious that that's what actually happened. Rather than just apologising, Camilla doubled down. She was very defensive, and she said, I wouldn't have printed something that I knew was a lie. Like, I wouldn't have printed that. That means either one of two things, doesn't it? And I can't be the judge of that, only Camilla knows which of these two things are true. So the first means that these very responsible high-up sources that she's using have lied to her, essentially. So that reveals that there are briefings, there are lies going on, that there is somebody or people high up in the system who are spreading lies or misinterpreting what's happening to create, I guess, to kind of, in that situation, to shield Kate from consequences and to kind of let Meghan take the hits. So if we take Camilla at her word that she genuinely wouldn't have printed something she believed to be a lie, then that's got to be the case, right? And you would think then, as a journalist, she would be investigating her sources, she'd be really angry, she'd be apologetic to Meghan, first of all, because she's kind of reported something wrongly and it's led to this massive hate campaign. There's none of that. There's no empathy, there's no sort of laying off her and thinking, oh gosh, you know, my mistake has led to this horrible situation for poor Meghan. I mean, it doesn't matter if Camilla likes her or not. If she's been lied to by a source, you would expect there'd be anger about that. She'd be wanting to, as a journalist, right, you would think she would have like an analytical mind, and she'd want to know, well, why did you lie to me? What's that system? So in that first instance, Harry and Meghan are proved right, that there are high-up sources and people working there that will spread negative stories about others that aren't necessarily true to save their particular players. The second option is that Camilla knew full well that this wasn't what happened and that she was working for particular royals as part of the kind of PR for the firm, presenting herself as a royal expert, but really doing their PR for them and helping them get ahead of the situation, right? Which is another thing that Harry and Meghan say is something that happens. So in either of those situations, whether Camilla has been duped herself or she was willingly part of it, it proves what Harry and Meghan was saying, doesn't it? And I also think what we really do have to look at here with our journalists and our broadcasters, and again, I can't make a comment on here about Camilla Tominey's motives and her personal feelings. I can't do that. I have my own suspicions, but they're not really worth anything. I can't prove it. But it certainly is interesting in this situation if she was lied to. And if other journalists too have been using sources which have actually been kind of working as PR for the other royals and kind of spreading lies, it does still make you question why in that profession they were so willing to believe it of Meghan, right? They were so willing to. It doesn't look like anyone delved into it. So even if they were lied to, as journalists, you'd think you'd look into it because it's a pretty big accusation to make. But there's none of that. They found it very, very easy to believe that of Meghan, right? They were told it and they thought, yeah, that fits. It makes sense that she would have made Kate cry. Now you've got to ask yourself why. Why did they accept that? Why did our media accept that narrative so much? And I believe the reason for that is racism and its bias, because people are so willing to believe that she's this angry black woman stereotype and she's hurting this poor, frail, delicate English rose. It really plays into racism and unconscious bias, you know. And again, I can't come on here and accuse Camilla Tominey of racism, you know. I can't do that. I can't tell what's in someone's heart. But what I can say is that what she's done has enabled a lot of racism, and it's worth looking at why these people, even if they were lied to, right, even if they're going for the I was a victim, I didn't know, first of all, why aren't they angry about it? And second of all, we need to look at why the British press was so willing that they got the complete wrong story. They got the victim and the perpetrator the wrong way round. And they did that why? Why was that the story they went for? Why didn't they question it? So, you know, also something that Meghan and Harry have said is that royal experts, etc., are kind of briefed, or they have communication with the palace. It's a kind of symbiotic relationship where it's really parasitic, and the royal experts, etc., they kind of get a little bit of power and they maintain their status and they break the stories because the royals play ball and they leak them little stories about other people to shield themselves. Now, Camilla Tominey has in the past said that she doesn't have communication from the palace, that, you know, she writes whatever she's feeling off her own back, etc., etc. But then when she was on This Morning, you know, she told Philip Schofield, one of the presenters, that she has been told by the palace before that they ring them up if they think a story's untrue. She's actually said that before, and she's spoken about being briefed by the palace. I believe it was for the documentary Princes and the Press. So these are briefings that go on, and we know from her own mouth that corrections are issued. So we have to ask questions about why was there no correction issued when Meghan was getting monstered in the press? It didn't mean they had to, you know, dump Kate in it. But why was there no correction? And that proves Harry and Meghan right. Okay, so another bad faith incident that happened with Camilla Tominey, which I wanted to use, not because it's like a big deal, but because it's a really good example of how the reporting kind of works in this country and how smear campaigns work. And they do that by monstering a person by taking away context, by taking like a tiny grain of truth of something that they've said, twisting it, changing it, making something that's totally innocuous, totally normal, and turning it into this awful, dreadful thing. And you can see this in the way that Camilla tells this. I think what we're seeing is how the tabloids work, how the tabloids take things that particular people they've chosen as their targets do or say, and they will kind of put them through this process where by the time the information gets fed out to the general public, it's not recognisable information anymore, and it's made them into pantomime villains. So Meghan was talking about Archie, and she was talking about books. I'm not sure where she was talking about this. I don't know if it's archetypes or not. And she talks about how Archie has a voracious appetite for books because he loves it when his mum and dad read to him. You know, that's something that, inoffensive, really very sweet, quite normal. Archie was a toddler at the time. Meghan saying that he loves it when they read to him. He loves books, right? Perfectly normal. Now, how is this reported by Camilla Tominey? And this is how this kind of thing works, because Camilla Tominey is invited onto This Morning, which is a really popular daytime show here, and it has got quite a right-wing slant. Like, I can't stand This Morning, it's not the best. But she goes on there, and she actually uses this, which is basically a mother talking about her love for her son, right? And she kind of changes it into something to humiliate Meghan. So what she does, and Camilla is an intelligent woman, I'm not going to demean her by pretending that she doesn't know what she's doing here, because she's intelligent. She definitely is an intelligent woman. So she then retells the story to the public, and she's not corrected on this. You know, nobody in that room calls her out on it. She changes it to say that Meghan is trying to say that Archie is a voracious reader in terms of the fact that he's reading to himself. And that's the interpretation she's putting across, because she literally tries to make out that Meghan is being narcissistic, Meghan is lying, Meghan is exaggerating. She actually says something about how, I find that a bit odd, really, that, so what, like a 2-year-old is reading, really? You know, that's the vibe. And they all laugh. So Meghan becomes humiliated. It becomes like this brag that Meghan's made. Oh, isn't Meghan a liar? How could a toddler possibly be reading? That's ridiculous. Does Meghan's narcissism know no bounds? And she did this to humiliate. The tone of it was trying to make people laugh at Meghan's expense, right? It was like, look at this ridiculous thing that she said. She's trying to tell us that that child is actually reading. Pull the other one, right? Come on. That's the vibe. It's a really unpleasant, nasty bullying vibe. Now, of course, that's not what Meghan said. So people on Twitter then went to Camilla Tominey after she'd made this appearance and actually posted the clip and said, that's not what was said. She didn't say that Archie was personally reading, and you knew that she didn't say that, and that's not what she was implying in the context of what she was saying. You did actually change completely what she said to change the meaning of the sentence. And Camilla Tominey again doubled down. She tried to pretend that those two things were the same. This intelligent woman really, rather than saying, oh, sorry, misinterpreted, maybe my bias was at play there, yeah, fair enough, she actually tried to imply that saying that a toddler reading books himself and a mum and dad reading books to a toddler was the same thing. So she then tried to gaslight people by acting like they were in fact the crazy ones who were looking for anything to bring her down. And it reminds me of Darvo, right? It's projection. Because what's actually happening is people like Camilla are jumping on anything Meghan says and trying to twist anything she says and change the meaning. But immediately people like Camilla will suddenly play victim and say, oh, why are you attacking me? Why are you trying to twist my words? When in that case, her words haven't been twisted. It's she who has twisted Meghan's words. And so the last and most recent thing that I thought would be useful talking about here, I mean, I'll probably make some other videos because Camilla Tominey's got quite a history with this, and I would be interested in looking at this in more detail. But the most recent situation is Camilla Tominey claiming that Nelson Mandela's granddaughter has said that Harry and Meghan using her grandfather's name is, in quotation marks, upsetting and tedious. So she wrote an article about this, basically, the idea being, I mean, I don't need to explain this to you, but I've got a video coming about the certain arms of attack on Harry and Meghan and how they're trying to split them from their support base. The reason I want to make that video is because it's really similar to abusive systems in real life and abusive and domestic violence dynamics, because it's like trying to separate a victim from those who will support them and from communities that might have things in common with them. And society also does this because it pits minorities against each other a lot so that we don't, you know, attack the top. So basically what she's doing is she's trying to get to that group of people who support Harry and Meghan against the racism they face. So perhaps someone like me who has no interest in the royals, doesn't agree with the royal family, doesn't even like the fact that Harry and Meghan were part of the royal family, but supports them completely and is in solidarity with them because I can see what's happening to them and I can see why it's happening. But the idea is to kill off that support base because they've already tried it with the military, right? So they've tried it with Diana. So the memory of Diana gives Harry strength. They've tried to kill that. The military was a place where Harry found community. They've tried to say that Harry has now betrayed the military. They've now gone for the anti-racist because a lot of anti-racists feel a lot of solidarity or sympathy with Harry and Meghan. Even if they don't agree with them on everything, I think anti-racists will feel solidarity and can at least recognise that what's happening there is awful, and Meghan has faced really disproportionate hatred, and a lot of that is to do with her race and her status. So it almost devalues and rubbishes anything Meghan might say about racism. So it's almost like, it's like a form of gaslighting, isn't it? Meghan's saying that she's faced this sort of racism, which we all know has happened and is documented. And the way this is being reported by people like Camilla Tominey is, oh, but anti-racist icon Nelson Mandela, who I just want to say, look, at the time when Nelson Mandela was not revered, right, when he was considered to be dangerous, he would have been called today woke and too progressive, and they would have smeared him. These very people are the people that would have smeared Nelson Mandela, right? And they are now using his name, and this is the thing, right? It's projection, because what Camilla's doing is claiming that Meghan and Harry are using Nelson Mandela's name and legacy to their own advantage, right? But that's not what's happening. What's actually happening here is that Camilla Tominey is using Nelson Mandela's own granddaughter and his legacy to take cheap shots at Harry and Meghan to undermine the racism they faced. Now, thank goodness, Angelica Mandela actually responded to this. So she wrote an article for The Atlantic, and I won't read the whole thing here, but I'm going to link it in the description box because it's it's a really good read. But the title is "Others Take Mandela's Name in Vain, Not Harry and Meghan." I applaud the work the royal couple does, inspired by my grandfather. I abhor those who exploit his legacy for personal gain. So this thing has gone so deep and it's so twisted at this point that Nelson Mandela's own granddaughter has had to write this and put out a statement because now her words, right, so her words as a black woman, her words when she's talking about her grandfather have been used. They weren't asking her because they cared, you know, they were using her. They wanted her to say something that they could turn against somebody else that they could turn against Meghan Markle, another black woman, right? And that's what these people do. They try to divide allies because they have to make the victim feel like they're completely alone. Now, I'm just going to read you a couple of bits from this article, but I will link the article in the description box. Live to Lead, a Netflix documentary series that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle produced, cites the legacy of Nelson Mandela as its inspiration. Because he was my grandfather, I was contacted recently by an Australian newspaper to comment on this. Call me naive, but I did not suspect that I was being recruited to a press vendetta against the royal couple. I was shocked when my remarks were misused. My statement of an obvious fact, that their struggles, my grandfather's and Harry and Meghan's, were hardly identical, was turned into a slight against the couple. When I voiced my annoyance at seeing Mandela's name and legacy exploited, that too was taken to be an attack on the documentary and the couple. This was far from what I'd meant. In fact, I felt dumbfounded and disheartened to see my name and my grandfather's used to serve a backlash against Meghan Markle, a woman of colour who'd had the temerity to marry into the British royal family. She talks about how she will always criticise cynical profiteering from her grandfather's legacy, but she says, that's not what I associate with Harry and Meghan. Indeed, I welcome the inspiration they've taken from my grandfather's legacy for their social activism. I admire them for the courage of their convictions and the good causes they have espoused. Their work resonates with my grandfather's preoccupation with justice and freedom for all. So it's actually taken Mandela to write this, to set the record straight, to protect another woman of colour. She's had to do this. You know, this has taken her time because her own words have been weaponised. And I feel like that in itself is a form of racism because it's like, it's trying to use a minority to speak badly about another minority, to split them apart and just create further hatred. But the loudness with which this was reported on by people like Camilla Tominey, and she's not the only one, but she's one of them, since this clarification has come out from Nelson Mandela's granddaughter, silence. There's been no apology. There's been no, this is what we thought, oh, really sorry for, you know, misquoting you, etc. There's been none of that. So what stays in people's minds is the loudness of, oh, Harry and Meghan disrespected Nelson Mandela. But Angelica Mandela's comments here are not going to be so loud. So the first one's going to stick. And that was always the point. Because in situations like this, the smear is loud. And you can refute the smears. You can have evidence that they're smears. But because it was so loud, the initial information was so loud, people won't remember it. People don't remember. And there's no accountability. These journalists haven't, like, come forward and said, oh, you know, sorry about that misquote, you know, obviously we were wrong. They just carry on and they carry on. Because it feels like there's nobody to hold them to account at all. And also just worth saying that I believe that the original interview with Angelica Mandela was done by a paper called The Australian, which is one of the Rupert Murdoch rags over in Australia. Yeah, so Richard Murdoch of The Sun. The Sun and the news of the world. So I thought it would be worth looking at how Camilla Tominey and people like her are using their platform. There's so many other things she's written which I'd be interested to kind of take a look at because there's a lot of it, but I wanted to use these 3 examples in the video. If you see something you would like me to comment on, please let me know, and I'll try and make that for you. Alright, love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Bye!